Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. All right, I need you to stay with me for the next 30 seconds because we are jumping straight into the deep end. We're talking about the ultimate showdown today.
Yeah.
The cozy comfort of faith versus the cold, hard logic of atheism. Is religion actually just a survival mechanism we learned as toddlers, like learning not to touch a hot stove? Does an atheist actually fear death more than a believer? Or do they somehow appreciate life more because they think, this is it, this is the only one they get? And here's the kicker. Why do we devote our entire lives to one specific God while completely rejecting nearly 3,000 others? We have a fascinating source today that is going to, I think, really challenge the idea that religion has a monopoly on being good. It's going to force us to look in the mirror and ask, why do I believe what I believe is the truth, or is it just a geography? Joining me to help unpack this heavy hitter is our resident expert. And look, I know this can be a spicy topic. We were walking right into the crossfire here.
It is great to be here. And yeah, spicy is putting it mildly.
For sure.
But what's fascinating about the material we have today is that it isn't really an attack on faith, you know? Even though it might feel like one at first glance,
Right.
it's actually a critical examination of the human condition.
Yeah.
It asks us to separate our cultural programming from our genuine search for truth. It's about understanding the mechanics of belief, how we get it, how we hold on to it, and how it shapes our view of everything, really, life and death.
Exactly. It's about the why. So let's get right into it. One of the first things that really jumped out at me from the source was this analogy of the human brain as a sponge.
Yes, the childhood sponge.
The argument is that when we are kids, we are literally programmed to believe everything our parents tell us.
Yeah.
And not because we're gullible, but because we have to be to survive.
Right. If you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, a child doesn't have the luxury of, debating with their parents.
No.
The source points out that children receive these rapid-fire survival instructions. Don't touch the fire. Don't go near the wolf. Don't touch the black widow spider.
Which are all very good pieces of advice, by the way. Big fans of not touching black widows here.
Absolutely. Skepticism in a toddler is a death sentence.
Right. If a kid stopped to ask for a peer-reviewed study on spider venom, they'd be dead.
Precisely. And the child accepts these as absolute truths because the consequences are physical and immediate. Fire burns, wolves eat you. But here is where the conflation happens. The source argues that mixed in with these physical survival tips is a metaphysical instruction. There is a God, and if you are bad, you will go to hell.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the kid's brain is categorizing fire burns and hell is real in the same do not question folder.
That is the core argument. Because that instruction is given with the same level of credence and authority as fire burns, it becomes incredibly difficult to undo later in life.
It's hardwired.
It's hardwired into the survival mechanism of the brain. The source suggests that this is why religious belief is so persistent. It's not just an idea you heard, it's a foundational block of your reality, installed before you had the capacity for critical thought.
And that leads to this really interesting thought experiment the source proposes. It's the 20-year-old hypothesis. Basically, you imagine a world where we weren't allowed to teach religion to kids. No gods, no atheism, nothing, until they turn 20.
It raises such a profound question about the nature of belief.
Right.
If you introduce the concept of a deity to an adult mind, a mind that has already developed critical thinking skills, understands physics, cause and effect, would it even take root?
Imagine handing a guy a holy book on his 20th birthday and saying, okay, so there's an invisible guy in the sky.
Exactly. The source argues that we would see a completely different pattern. You'd likely have far more atheists and fewer faithful people because that sponge phase is it's over.
Yeah.
The adult mind would demand evidence in a way that the child mind does not.
It's the difference between learning a language as a toddler versus trying to learn it when you're 40.
Yeah.
One is natural, the other is a real struggle.
Very good analogy.
But speaking of where we grow up, this brings us to the geography of belief. This part really made me stop and think.
It's a powerful point.
The source points out this huge statistical anomaly. If you were born in India, you were statistically likely to be Hindu. If you're born in America, you're likely Christian.
In Pakistan, you're likely Muslim.
Exactly.
It connects right back to that idea of conditioning. The source highlights the massive coincidence involved here. Everyone, regardless of where they are born, tends to feel incredibly lucky that they were born into the right religion.
Right. It's like, whew, thank goodness I was born in Ohio. Otherwise, I might have believed in the wrong God and gone to hell.
Exactly that. The source notes the deep irony that while a person feels relief about being in the right group, they believe everyone born in those other regions, through no fault of their own, just pure geography, is doomed.
Wow.
It challenges you, the listener, to consider. Is your belief a result of some divine revelation, or is it simply a map coordinate?
That is the heavy lifting right there.
It really is. The argument is that if you had been swapped at birth with a baby in a different country, you wouldn't just speak a different language. You would be praying to a completely different deity with the exact same conviction you have now.
That is a heavy realization. It makes you realize how much of our identity is just circumstance. But let's pivot to the other side of the coin. We've talked about how belief forms. Now let's talk about the source's definition of atheism.
Okay.
Because I think there's a stereotype that atheists are these, closed-minded cynics who refuse to believe in anything.
Yeah.
But the source frames it very differently.
Yes, the source pushes back hard against that accusation of being closed-minded. The argument is that atheism isn't a refusal to believe, it's a commitment to following the evidence.
Right.
The source explicitly says that if someone proved God existed, it would be the greatest scientific discovery of all time.
They wouldn't be mad about it. They'd be popping champagne.
They'd celebrate. Scientists wouldn't sulk, because science is about discovering what is true. If the evidence led to a creator, a true scientist, or an honest atheist, in this view would embrace it immediately.
So the refusal to believe isn't stubbornness.
No, it's a lack of data. They are waiting for the proof.
And this leads to what I think is the strongest logical argument in the whole deep dive, the one less God argument.
It's so simple and effective.
I love the math on this because it's so simple, but it just stops you in your tracks.
It is a very effective way to reframe the discussion. The source notes that throughout human history, there are approximately 2,780 recorded gods.
That's a lot of gods.
We are talking about Zeus, Thor, Ra, Vishnu, Apollo, Ganesh. I mean, the list goes on and on.
That is a crowded room in the sky.
It is. Now, if you speak to a devout Christian, they do not believe in 2,779 of those gods.
Right.
They regard Zeus and Thor as myths. They dismiss them completely. They don't lose sleep wondering if Thor is going to strike them with lightning.
Right. To them, Thor is just a comic book character.
Exactly. So the atheist simply goes one step further. They believe in just one less God than the Christian.
That puts it in such a clear perspective.
Right.
We are all atheists about almost every god that has ever been worshipped.
Yes.
Some of us just finished the list.
Precisely. And it connects to how we handle the burden of proof. The source mentions the Santa Claus analogy.
Ah, yes.
When an adult asks you, why don't you believe in Santa? You don't say, well, I'm agnostic about Santa. I can't disprove his existence, so I remain open to the possibility.
Right. You'd look ridiculous. You just say, there's no evidence. It's a story for kids. I dismiss it.
And the source argues that for an atheist, the stance on God is identical. It's not an attack. It's not some deep emotional grudge. It's simply looking at the claim, seeing no evidence, and dismissing it.
The same way we dismiss fairies at the bottom of the garden.
But, and here's the tension, when you apply that logic to God, people feel mocked.
Oh, absolutely. The source talks about this double standard. People say, thank God, all the time in casual conversation, right? And an atheist isn't supposed to get offended. But if you say, I don't believe, in certain parts of America, it's seen as this huge insult.
It touches on the fragility of belief versus the neutrality of non-belief. The source argues that stating, I don't believe, is treated as an aggressive act, whereas asserting God is great is treated as a default social norm.
Now, let's get into the ethics of it all. Because the big fear, and I hear this all the time, is that if you take away God, you take away morality.
The great fear.
If there's no big rule book in the sky, what stops us all from just running wild? But the source has this really grounding background story. They grew up in a poor working-class estate, like the projects. And their mom wanted them to have Christian values. But not because she was a theologian.
No, it was completely practical. She wanted those values so her child didn't die in a barroom fight.
Which is a very real, very pragmatic motivation.
It is, but the source makes a crucial distinction. The mother believed the church held the monopoly on good. The source argues that you don't need the theology to have the morality.
You can separate them.
You can strip away the supernatural elements and still be a good person.
They bring up the golden rule, right? Yeah. Treat others how you want to be treated.
Exactly. The source explains that their morality isn't transactional. They aren't being good because they expect a reward in heaven. They are good because They want to live in a world where people are kind to one another. In fact, the source hints that this might be a more authentic form of morality.
How so?
Well, if you are only helping someone because you want a ticket to paradise, is that true goodness or is it just a business transaction? You're essentially buying fire insurance.
Okay. Wow.
But if you help someone knowing there is no reward, you're doing it just for the sake of goodness itself.
Ooh, that's a sharp point. Doing good for goodness sake versus doing good for a reward. But let's talk about the reward or the lack thereof. We have to talk about death. This is the part that keeps people up at night.
It is.
The source asks this question. What does it feel like to be dead?
And the answer they give is incredibly comforting, I think, in its logic, they say. It feels exactly like the billions of years before you were born.
I mean, when you put it that way, I wasn't inconvenienced by the year 1750. I wasn't suffering during the Jurassic period. I just wasn't there.
That's the point. It removes the fear of being dead. You won't be there to experience the nothingness.
But this leads to the biggest misconception about atheism, that it is a doom and gloom worldview.
Yes, that it must be so depressing.
Right. I think the assumption is, oh, you think we just turn into dirt? How sad. You must be miserable knowing there's no sequel.
But the source flips that completely. They argue that because there is no sequel, this life is infinitely more valuable. It's the economics of scarcity.
Supply and demand. If you have infinite life, any single moment is cheap. If you have 80 years, every moment is gold.
Precisely. The source describes a heightened appreciation for nature, for animals, for hobbies, for just seeing a friend. They know the clock is ticking.
Yep.
They mention that their own grandmother used to say, "I'm not long for this world," and that reality brings a focus, a clarity to the present.
There's that beautiful contrast the source draws. For the believer, death is the start of something glorious.
Right.
For the atheist, death is the end of something glorious.
And if you believe it's the end, you treat the now as precious. You don't put off joy for the afterlife. You find the joy right here in the mountains, in connections with people.
Which brings us to the distinction between spirituality and religion. Because the source claims you can be spiritual without buying into the whole organized system.
Yes, and this is a vital distinction for the source. They describe spirituality as that personal feeling of awe seeing a mountain, feeling love for a pet or a friend.
That funny feeling.
That funny feeling of joy, that is real and that is valid.
But religion is the structure around it.
The source defines religion as the organized body that can be used for power, for corruption. They are fine with the personal feeling. They take issue with the institution, especially when it leads to intolerance.
The source actually mentions what makes their blood boil. And it's not faith itself, it's injustice.
Injustice and the arrogance of arguing whose God is right. That religious intolerance is what frustrates the source.
You see people fighting over which version of the truth is correct.
While missing the shared humanity right in front of them.
It's tragic, really. We're all stuck on this rock together, arguing about who wrote the rule book. As we wrap this up, there's one final anecdote from the source that I just found hilarious and perfect. They were talking about a tweet they received from a critic.
Oh, the irony in this is just, it's delicious.
The tweet said, "Everyone is entitled to their opinion, so keep quiet about your atheism."
It encapsulates the entire conflict in one sentence. You are free to think what you want as long as you don't say it.
Right.
It highlights the struggle of the non-believer in a predominantly faithful society. They are asked to respect the faith of others, while their own lack of faith is often viewed as something that should be hidden away.
So what does this all mean for us? This deep dive wasn't about convincing you to stop believing or to start. It was about examining the why.
Exactly. The source material asks us to challenge our foundations. Is your belief based on fear? Is it based on where you were born? Is it based on evidence? It's uncomfortable work, but it's necessary if we want to truly understand ourselves.
And I want to leave you with this thought. We talked about the geography of belief earlier. So try this mental exercise tonight. If you had been born on the exact opposite side of the planet, to parents with a completely different culture, who or what would you be praying to right now? And more importantly, would you be just as certain that you were right? Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper. Catch you on the next one.